Welcome to The Teaching Curve, a podcast exploring the pedagogy of global politics and international studies, produced under the auspices of the Innovative Pedagogy Initiative of the International Studies Association, and made available through ISA's Professional Resource Center. I'm Jamie Free, Associate Provost and Professor of Global Politics at Bridgewater College. Each episode of The Teaching Curve is a conversation with a thoughtful and engaged teacher of global politics. The goal is to celebrate and inspire pedagogical creativity by attending to how others adapt the passions that drive their academic careers into terms and practices that make those passions accessible to students. I have found that hearing about how others spend their creative pedagogical energies is often just the spark I need to refocus my own investments. I hope the same is true for you. This episode's conversation is with Dr. Maïka Sondarjee, Assistant Professor in the School of International Development and Global Studies at the University of Ottawa in Canada. Maïka teaches and researches international organizations, white savior complex, and feminist approaches to IR. Her recent article in the August 2022 edition of ISP explores how to improve the ways in which we incorporate gender and feminist thought into IR Syllabi. And an upcoming article does the same for perspectives from the Global South. Our conversation explores how academics ignore their agency as teachers, even as they often emphasize that agency as scholars. What it means to emphasize agency in rebuilding the often unquestioned structures we have inherited for introduction to IR courses, and how to integrate feminist and post-colonial perspectives throughout syllabi, not just as one coherent point of view, but as a mechanism for teaching complexity. So, Dr. Maïka Sondarjee, thank you very much for coming to be part of the Teaching Curve and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, I always begin these by having the interviewee describe a little bit about the institution that they're at, mostly by talking about those people that make us professors, who are the students in our courses and at the institution. So can you tell me a little bit about the students at the University of Ottawa?
I just love how you frame it, because I feel like most people understand their job as professors as researchers. But I think for me, the most important part is what you're saying is actually interacting with students. And at the University of Ottawa, or maybe I'll talk more about the School of International Development, it's very diverse. So we have a huge population from East Africa, West Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia as well, for the undergrad, but also for the graduate students. I think because a lot of people want to learn about what they see in their countries, the Western institutions they see in their countries, and these are opportunities they have, or a lot of them have projects also for emancipation or for the betterment of the world. And I think that's something very specific. It's that our students are actually, they all want to do something to make this world a better place, which I think is very specific. And so they when you bring like critical visions of the world or ways to see the world in ways that they haven't seen before, they're really eager to learn. They're really eager to understand how inequalities work, how the world order works and all that, because they have these positionalities that are transnational, international, or a lot of immigrants, first generation or second generation. It's really it's a fascinating, I think, group of people to teach to, and I'm very happy to have been hired in such a school, really.
And so are yours students, are you teaching both undergraduate and graduate students?
Yes, and I should say, I think because of my research interests and the variety of my interests, I already have 12 students, graduate students that I'm supervising, 3 PhDs and 9 masters. So yes, they let me do supervision. I guess it means I'm going to get tenured. We don't know.
Good
we
luck.
hope. But yeah, and then undergraduates. Only I was going to say smaller class. It's still like a 60 people class in gender and development. I'm also teaching like methodology, which I love also. And that's a class I think that students appreciate and makes them learn a lot. But often professors don't want to teach those classes. But I feel like teaching a student what is a research question is going to be life-changing, or like their research life is going to change, because they're going to understand the whole world of possibilities of how to do research. So yeah, that's what I teach.
Well, it is a very kind of academic culture way of seeing things, and if it's kind of that methodology class often help students shift over from thinking about education just as absorbing some facts to something that they do. It's very
Exactly.
exciting.
Exactly. I know we have the same philosophy about like making students learn in an active, proactive way. And I think in methodology, it's just really easy to do because we're going to do like a small workshop about research questions. I'm going to send them do an interview. I'm going to send them do a little ethnography. And it's really hands-on in terms of learning. And I try to do that in every class, but it's sometimes it's harder to integrate or implement, because if it's a theory class, you need to transmit some knowledge, but my classes are very rarely 3 hours of me talking and giving knowledge or information. That's not how I see knowledge anyways.
Right, exactly. What motivates you as a teacher? What do you think, why do you think you are investing so much energy in figuring out how to be a good teacher?
Because this job is so important, Jamie. It is crucial. These students are going to become, they're in an article I wrote, I write, they are IR scholars to be, international relations scholars to be. They are the future leaders. They're also the future civil servants. You don't need to be a leader to have an impact on the world we live in. And so the students I'm teaching, and a lot of them, if they are international students, they come from a background, most of them at least, that are able to come. So in terms of their own country, they will be people, the actors of change. So I think my job is really important in terms of making them understand what development means, what international relations mean, what the global order and all that. I think for that kind of population, it's really crucial for really politically for the next decades of our lives. For me, for my life in 10 or 15 years, I'm sure I already see students I taught 3 or 4 years ago be in positions of power. And so it's really, I never see my job as secondary to other things. And I know we disagree with that sentence sometimes people say about, when you can, you do, and when you can't, you teach. Oh my God, like it requires so much skill.
Yes.
And it's important to work on those skills and to put energy into our teaching. And I love that there's a community in international relations that value that more and more. I think it's crucial.
And of course, that's in some ways generic to what the profession is. But I think there's ways in which that particular topics that we teach have add to that importance in some way. And I'm sure everybody in other disciplines thinks the same thing. But I mean, the stuff that you're teaching, how do you feel like that particularly intersects with this mission that you're describing about helping students to become future leaders?
Well, it's interesting because it's the topic, but also how you decide to teach a certain topic. And a lot of new professors or lecturers or sessionals tend to copy other syllabi. And I've seen that in my research, and it's often very similar from one syllabi to the other. But a lot of us don't realize that we actually have a lot of freedom. We can really decide what is IR. Because it's not set in stone. It's not like I'm teaching you about gravity. It's not like I'm teaching you about math. And even that, I think Alexander Wen and other people about quantum would say that we can teach that in other ways. But what I mean is, like, most syllabi I've seen in theories of international development start with Harry Truman, 1947, this speech he did about underdeveloped countries and developed countries. And we start development with Western institutions working in countries of the global south to help, quote unquote, countries of the global south. When I start my theories of development class, I start with colonialism. Why are international inequalities, why do they exist? Even why are there marginalization, exploitation? Why do we let that happen? And that's because of colonization. That's because of patriarchy. That's because of all these things that a lot of people don't talk about. So I think my aim, and it's not it is political, and how I teach my class is political, but how everyone teaches their class is political.
Yes.
And is biased in terms of where we come from, our positionality, how we've been trained. So I think to reflect on that and to think, oh, well, like, am I teaching my students in a way that prepares them for the real world? If I'm teaching my students in a gender blind kind of way, they're going to get into the real world and see the world as gender blind and not see that there are inequalities or that the world is gendered and all that. So I think it's that's an interesting thing that I think we should have more conversations about, is how we actually create what the field we are in while teaching it. And these students are going to choose research topics for their graduate studies. They're going to advise governments. They're going to work in international organizations. So it's really crucial that we shift the thinking of students to actually make them better civil servants and workers and all that.
Maïka, I really like that idea that there's a lot of agency in how we teach, because I think that, you know, especially as you said, people who are getting started, they're looking for some way to both kind of appropriate some authority that they may feel insecure about themselves as they walk into the classroom, to be able to convey that, to justify standing up in front of the students, but also because it's so different from how we think about scholarship, where all of us do think that we're supposed to be contributing something new, we're building something, we have these perspectives, and yet often that doesn't translate into how we think about what we're supposed to teach.
Exactly. No, it's true. And even when I talk to people who don't necessarily do research in feminist studies or post-colonial or decolonial or whatever, they often agree with me. I'm really surprised at how my research on syllabi, on teaching and pedagogy has been pretty consensual when I talk about it. But then when I look at the people's syllabi, it's not the same thing. So it's like, oh, you agree with me, so good. And then when you teach, you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And even people working on how, you know, the paradigms have shifted, and that, you know, some paradigms have been replaced, or, you know, we can change theories. But in terms of our teaching and what is the history of the field, we're going to keep doing the same thing. We're going to keep starting in Westphalia and not talking about it was kind of violent for a lot of countries. And, you know, in our teaching, we're much more stable, I think, than in our approaches. And people are surprised when I talk about the data I found about syllabi, because like, oh no, but we don't think like that anymore. Well, we still teach like that. So
that's really interesting. Let's get into that, because I'm very fascinated for you to describe a little bit more about the ISP article. Tell me well, start off with what the argument is, and then tell me how you went about figuring out what you discovered.
So my argument is that teaching feminist approaches and gender studies in 1 week of the semester or of the year compartmentalizes it in the minds of students. So I wanted to prove really with data that what I saw in my graduate studies, in my undergrad, and as a teaching assistant and as a lecturer, that I wanted to prove that the fact that instructors in IR mostly think about and teach feminist approaches in 1 week, in really the sacrosanct Women's Week. And I thought that would be the majority of the cases. And I analyzed 50 syllabi in Introduction to International Relations and undergrad syllabi, because I think not that many scholars look at undergrad syllabi. It's like we look at graduate syllabi because they're more important. But I think what is foundational to the field is really what we think is important to teach our undergrads. And then for the graduate studies, we can like explode the box and explore outside the box and all that. But then if we teach our students that this is the box, then a lot of them are going to stay in the box. So anyway, so I analyzed these 50 syllabi, and that all started because as a graduate student, I was a teaching assistant for Introduction to IR for 5 years, classes of 300, 200, 300 students. And most of them, one professor assigned a few feminist 1 or 2 articles, but most of them just did nothing, actually. One of them, at one point I said, let me teach one class. Let me teach the feminist theory. So then I started doing that. And I realized I was doing what I was complaining is that as a mixed race women, I was teaching about feminist approaches. I was I was presenting it as like a sectoral interest of one female mixed race professor, which makes it even less important, because it's just so then only, and if you call a class with a feminist word or gender something, you're gonna have a majority of women students. And so I really want to change. Because gender is not about women. Gender is about gender relations. It's about gender power. It's about marginalization. It's about fluidity. It's about it. The world is gendered in so many ways. So I wanted to prove that. So I looked at the syllabi, and Jamie, it was even worse than I imagined. I was so sad because I thought most of them would teach in a compartmentalized way, like with a women's week. Actually, most of them, half of them, don't teach about gender at all. Not even one article, not even like the gendered impact of globalization, not even like security and women, not even like classic articles like Tickner about power, the Morgenthau's definition of power as masculine and her redefinition of power as the capacity to act in collaboration, like in a feminist way. Not even like really classical, not even Schoberg in War and Peace. And so half of them don't teach about it, and the rest of the other half, the majority, I think three quarters of them teach it in a compartmentalized way. 2 or 3 actually do what I think we should do, is assign articles here and there, maybe with a feminist week, so that you present the variety of approaches, the theories. But when you teach it in only 1 week, what it does is that we think about feminist as one theory. But let me tell you that we have a lot of debates, Marxist feminists and post-colonial feminists and postmodern feminists and feminists looking at knowledge and feminists looking at bodies. And we all do so different things that it's not because you think about women's or gender emancipation that you are the same as other women doing that, or men doing that, doing feminist approaches. So I was kind of sad to prove my point, but it resonates now with a lot of people who have been to grad school and were also annoyed by that. And then are like, oh, well, I was not alone.
So how do you think that textbook culture factors into that, in the sense that, you're talking about assigning articles, but, sometimes academic articles are very difficult in a first intro class, and so a lot of people rely on kind of the textbook to help out with that. How does that culture factor in?
It's true, and I also looked at that for other articles, and it's really it has a huge importance. And I think there's new textbook now. You've done an edited volume with other approaches. Tickner and Smith have done another like textbook with non-Western approaches of international relations. I've done one in French about feminist approaches of international relations, really with the goal of helping instructors to let's just add 3,500 words chapter to your week on security, or to your week on international organizations, or to your week on indigenous politics. And for those who have a week on indigenous politics, which is not a lot. But so I looked at syllabi for an article on with the same mindset, but on the Western gaze. And all the textbooks are edited in Western countries. Most of them, if I'm not mistaken, only one is co-authored by a woman, and one is co-authored by 2 women, but the rest of them, like 15 of them maybe, are by men. So it's really, I'm not saying all men are non-feminists and all women are feminists, but I looked at the table of content, and most of them have 1 chapter or no chapter, or if they do, it's like 1 chapter on gender, and then they only present. And I love them, but Ann Tickner, Laura Joberg, and like the most known, like Carpenter, the most known white feminists. Not that they're white feminists, but they're feminists who are white. And so it's like, it's not promoting the voices of other types of women in IR who exist, who are there, but who are not maybe as well known or published. And so it's really, as I said, it's biased. In textbooks, sadly, are really biased because you choose how you present the field, and then people are going to use that for years. And I remember the textbook we were using, I won't name the authors, but it had been published like 15 years ago and then re-edited, and then a chapter on constructivism has been added, and a chapter on feminism has been added. And it's really it's detrimental, I think, to the way we present the field, for sure.
So do you have suggestions for somebody who wants to fix that in their own courses?
It's a good point, because actually I love the fact that ISP accepted an article with kind of a political goal, because it's actually it's pretty much an article about how to. how to do that. Because what I suggest and what I've seen in some syllabi is that you can assign articles here and there, not necessarily every week. I'm not saying all introduction to IR courses should be about feminism and post-colonialism. But then here and there, if you talk about globalization, why don't you assign an African author on globalization? On a week in security, why don't you assign a feminist on security? So that you don't have like a week on Africa where you present an African on globalization, an African on feminist stuff, an African on security. Like, it's not, that is also a problem. So we take all these people in a diverse field and then we put them in a week. And for Global South scholars, it's really stark because we really perceive them as data collectors and as area studies kind of people. But a lot of Africans have perspectives on globalization or security or other things that would be useful, very useful for us to learn about in the topics they are actually talking about. So what I'm saying is you have feminist approaches and theories and or case studies, then assign them in the area studies or the thematic they are actually talking about.
Fantastic. And you know, it's interesting because you're absolutely right that what that gets at is the kind of larger structure of what we think international relation is in a 15-week undergraduate class. Like there's a way in which what you're doing is bringing some of the nuance and complexity that we all experience, say going to an ISA convention, into that framework that for many people, I can hear them going, we need to simplify it for 18-year-olds. We need to kind of help them see, and they have no experience of thinking about Africa in a particular way. But you're right that if we have to empathize with them and meet them where they are, but if we reinforce that in some ways, then we're just perpetuating that simplistic understanding of how the world works as opposed to helping complexify it.
Yeah, exactly. And we see those biases influencing the way we dealt with the pandemic. We see those biases influencing the way we invade some countries and not others. We see that in how we trust or how we value some expertise and not others. Why didn't we trust West African expertise during the pandemic? Because we devalue, epistemically, we devalue researchers and experts from those places. And then the other articles, the other article I'm writing with the same kind of data and syllabi, and but on countries of the Global South and post-colonial, decolonial approaches and race studies and all that, what I've seen is it's not only that we talk more about one region or the other. So of course we're going to talk more about the United States. That I had an assumption about that, but the way we talk about sub-Saharan Africa is very important. So we talk about the United States as being powerful, of course, as having agency. We talk about its foreign policy. We talk about its leaders. But when we talk about Africa, we talk about poverty, genocide, corruption. Resources. We don't even talk about, I don't know, South Africa as an important actor in the world scene. And I have looked at what leaders we mention in syllabi, and it's of course mostly Western and mostly from the United States and Europe, and it's all men. Of like 50 leaders that are mentioned, it's all men. We don't even mention Queen Elizabeth. We don't mention Indira Gandhi. We don't, like, there have been women leaders and African and South Asia leaders, and that we don't even mention, but we mention like Michael Pompeo, or like defeated presidential candidates. Right. So it's really, as we're saying, we are biased because we tend to reproduce a way of seeing the world, and you're right that then students are going to go into that world with those biases. So it's not, it's very political.
Well, I hope so. That's kind of the point. But Maïka, this is excellent, and I'm looking forward to seeing this research about the decolonization of syllabi and the kind of thinking from the Global South. I know that's in process, and I'm looking forward to reading that as well. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with me and letting everybody in the audience know about this really interesting perspective that I think taps into the agency of students more than the assumptions that sometimes we go into those courses with.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for all the work you do in pedagogy. I mean, you are precious to that field. Thanks very much.
The Teaching Curve podcast is made available in the International Studies Association Professional Resource Center under the auspices of the Innovative Pedagogy Initiative. You can send feedback or suggestions for future interviews to teachingcurve@isanet.org. And follow us on Twitter @teachingcurve. Be sure to keep an eye out for information coming soon on the next Innovative Pedagogy Conference to be held in Montreal on Tuesday, March 14th, the day before the start of panels at the main ISA convention. Save the date and make sure that you arrive plenty of time to take advantage of the vibrant workshops and conversations. Thanks again for joining us on the Teaching Curve, and remember, learn something every time you teach.